Lyra had always known she was different, born into an alien race with extraordinary abilities and vast intelligence. She had spent much of her life seeking acceptance. Yet, despite her brilliance, she was often rejected by those who shared her origin. Her kind, an ancient and powerful species, valued strength, beauty, and heritage. But Lyra's uniqueness was never seen as a gift. Her skin, a soft blue hue, was a mark of her alien lineage, but it made her stand out too much. Her sharp, delicate features, though often admired by some, only seemed to make her seem distant to others. Throughout her life, she had watched as those around her formed connections, bonds, and families. She had tried, many times, to fit in, but it never worked. Every time she approached someone, the conversation felt forced, and the looks of confusion or disinterest were hard to ignore. The rejection stung more than she cared to admit, but she kept it hidden behind a calm, controlled exterior. Her race, once powerful and revered, had declined over the centuries. What was once a proud civilization had turned into a scattered group of wanderers, each of them keeping to their own, seeking refuge in the farthest corners of the galaxy. Lyra had traveled to countless worlds, trying to find a place where she might be accepted. But every time she tried, she felt the same emptiness. The people she met, whether they were human or alien, only saw her as different. She was nothing more than an outsider. One day, while searching for answers among a group of intergalactic travelers, Lyra stumbled upon a human colony on the outskirts of the galaxy. It was a small, quiet settlement, far from the bustling centers of power in the universe. The humans here lived simply, with their small houses and hard work, but there was a warmth about them that Lyra hadn't felt in years. It was a stark contrast to the cold, calculated politics she had become used to. At first, Lyra had no intention of staying long. She merely observed, intrigued by the simplicity of their lives. But the longer she watched, the more she found herself drawn to the humans. They didn't seem to care about the differences between species. They didn't look at her skin or her strange, delicate features. They didn't ask where she came from or what her purpose was. They simply went about their daily lives, living as they always had. Among them was a human named Marcus. He was a young man, seemingly ordinary, yet Lyra noticed something different about him. He had a calmness to him that set him apart from the others. His kindness wasn't forced, it was genuine. He smiled at strangers and helped those in need without expecting anything in return. It was the kind of warmth Lyra had never experienced, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Lyra watched from the shadows, unsure of what to do. She had never been in a place like this before. Here, humans lived with so little, yet there was a beauty in it that Lyra couldn't help but admire. She had seen countless planets, each more technologically advanced than the last, but none had the same warmth as this one. It was as if the people here weren't afraid of their flaws or their differences. They simply existed. As the days passed, Lyra couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. His smile, his gentle laugh, and the way he carried himself. It all spoke to her on a level she couldn't explain. It was as if, for the first time, someone saw her. Not as an alien or a stranger, but as a person. She couldn't understand why, but she felt an overwhelming desire to know him, to be near him, to experience whatever it was that made him so different from everyone else. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft orange, Lyra found herself standing near the village square. She hadn't planned to, but there he was, sitting on a bench, reading a book. He didn't notice her at first, and she hesitated. Should she approach him? Would he even speak to her? The thought of rejection flooded her mind again, but this time, something felt different. The fear that had held her back for so long was slowly starting to fade. Gathering all the courage she could muster, Lyra stepped forward, her footsteps light and almost hesitant. Marcus looked up from his book, and for a moment, their eyes met. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. His gaze wasn't filled with confusion or fear. Instead, there was curiosity and a faint smile, as if he was waiting for her to speak. "Hello," she said softly, her voice surprisingly steady. She couldn't remember the last time she had been this nervous. Marcus smiled warmly and closed the book. "Hey there. You're not from around here, are you?" Lyra's chest tightened. She had never been able to explain herself to anyone without facing questions or strange stares. But Marcus didn't seem to care. There was no judgment in his voice, just an open invitation for conversation. "No," she replied. "I'm not. I'm just passing through." "Well, welcome," Marcus said, his voice friendly. "I'm Marcus." "I'm Lyra," she answered, her heart racing. She wasn't sure why, but it felt right to say her name out loud, to share it with someone who seemed to truly care. They sat together in the fading light of the day, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, this human might see her for who she truly was. Maybe this place, this simple colony, could be the beginning of something new. Days passed since Lyra had first met Marcus, and the small moments they shared left a lasting impression on her. They would meet often, exchanging quiet words as they sat together under the stars, or during long walks through the village. Lyra had never felt so connected to another person before, and each encounter made her heart feel lighter, as though she were shedding the weight of centuries of loneliness. Marcus was different from anyone she had known. She began to realize that what she felt for him was more than simple curiosity. It was something deeper, something that made her feel more alive. His kindness was unlike any she had experienced in her travels across the galaxy. When he smiled, it wasn't forced, and when he laughed, it was genuine. It was this warmth that made her want to stay near him, to learn more about the humans who lived in such a peaceful, simple way. One evening, while they were sitting together near the village's edge, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Marcus spoke up. "Lyra, you've been here for a while now, and I have to ask, what made you come to this place? What brought you here?" Lyra hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was complicated. She wasn't just passing through. She had been running from her past, from the rejection she had faced from her own kind. She had thought that maybe she could escape it, maybe start anew, but the feelings of isolation never truly went away. I needed to get away," she finally said, her voice soft. "I come from a place where I was never truly accepted. I thought maybe here, with humans, I might find something different. I didn't expect to find someone like you." Marcus looked at her, his gaze steady and full of understanding. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I'm glad you found a place where you feel safe." The sincerity in his words made her heart swell. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. She wasn't just a stranger or an alien to him. She was simply Lyra, a person. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt like she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost cracking. She had never known how to truly express the depth of her gratitude, but she knew Marcus could see it in her eyes. It was a bond forming between them, one that neither of them had expected but both seemed to embrace without hesitation. But as the days turned into weeks, Lyra couldn't help but notice something troubling. Though she had begun to open up to Marcus in ways she never had before, she still kept her true identity hidden. She had told him she was just passing through, but that wasn't entirely true. She had been exiled from her home planet for her connection to a human, and she feared what would happen if he found out. She worried that once Marcus knew the truth, he would look at her differently. That was the fear that had plagued her for so long. What would others think of her when they truly knew who she was? Despite the uncertainty, Marcus seemed to enjoy spending time with her. He never once asked about her past, and he treated her with the same kindness he showed to everyone else in the village. There was something so refreshing about him, his ability to look beyond the surface, to see someone for who they truly were. It made Lyra want to be honest with him, to tell him everything, but the thought of rejection once again held her back. She didn't want to risk losing the one person who made her feel human. One afternoon, As they walked through the village market, Marcus stopped and turned to her. "You know," he said, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I've been wondering, why do you hide your beauty?" Lyra blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had always thought her appearance was a burden, something that set her apart from others. "I don't hide it," she said, unsure of how to respond. "It's just who I am." Marcus smiled gently. "You should never hide who you are. You're not just any alien. You're, well, you're Lyra. You're special, and the world should see that." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time anyone had ever said something so kind to her, something that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. Her skin, her delicate features, her alien nature, all of it had always been a point of rejection, a source of shame. But here, with Marcus, it felt like something beautiful, something worth sharing. She hadn't expected him to understand, but he did. And somehow, that made her feel even more drawn to him. Over the next few days, Lyra found herself thinking more and more about what Marcus had said. She began to wonder if perhaps she could be truly free here, among the humans. Maybe she could finally be herself without fear of judgment. It was a scary thought, but the idea of living a life without hiding who she was made her feel a sense of hope she hadn't known for a long time. As she stood in the village square one evening, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky, Lyra realized that for the first time, she wasn't alone. She had found a place where she could be herself, where she could find a connection with someone who didn't care about her past or her alien status. He cared about her, just as she was. But still, doubt lingered. Could Marcus, a simple human, ever truly accept her, knowing what she was? What would happen if she revealed the truth? She wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. She wanted to find out. The days continued to pass peacefully, and Lyra found herself growing closer to Marcus. She began to see the human world in a new light, one that was filled with warmth and simplicity, qualities she had never truly experienced before. Marcus's kindness had become her anchor in this strange new world. She had never expected to feel at home among humans, but somehow she did. It was as if Marcus's presence was enough to make her feel like she belonged, even though she was from a faraway planet. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Marcus invited Lyra to join him for a walk through the quiet hills outside the village. She hesitated at first, unsure of how to explain herself or how much she should share with him. But the thought of spending more time with him, of talking with him, filled her with a warmth she couldn't ignore. They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the beauty of the landscape. The gentle breeze brushed against Lyra's skin, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The air was fresh and calming, and the distant sound of birdsong made everything feel more serene. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment she had grown accustomed to in the galaxy. This world, Earth, was different, and it felt like a place where she could breathe, where she could relax. Eventually, Marcus spoke up. "Lyra, you've been here for a while now, but you haven't really told me much about yourself. I know we've had our talks, but there's still so much I don't understand about you. I want to know you better. If you're comfortable, of course." Lyra stopped walking, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment was coming. She had been waiting for Marcus to ask questions, but now that the time had come, she wasn't sure what to say. How could she explain her past, her true identity, without risking everything she had come to care about? She turned to face him, her eyes filled with hesitation. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's so much I haven't told you, so much that's not easy to talk about." Marcus looked at her with a gentle expression, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to say everything right now," he said softly. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. I'm not going anywhere." His words were like a balm to her troubled heart. For so long, Lyra had been running, keeping her true self hidden from everyone she met. But here, with Marcus, she didn't feel the need to hide anymore. She didn't have to put on a mask or pretend to be something she wasn't. He saw her as she was, and he cared for her without judgment. "I was rejected," Lyra began, her voice trembling slightly. "By my own people. My race. We are supposed to be strong, perfect. But I'm different. My skin is different, my features. Everything about me was seen as something to be ashamed of. I was never accepted. I was always an outsider." Marcus took a step closer to her, his expression filled with empathy. "I can't imagine how painful that must have been for you, to feel like you don't belong, to be rejected by those you thought would accept you. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Lyra nodded, grateful for his understanding. "And it's not just that. I've seen so much. I've traveled to many places, met many beings. But no one has ever looked at me the way you do, Marcus. No one has ever seen me as a person, as someone worth knowing. I've always been something to study, something to observe. But you look at me like I'm just me." A smile tugged at Marcus's lips. "Well, that's because you are just you. And that's enough. No one should ever have to hide who they are. Not even you." His words washed over Lyra like a wave of relief. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was allowed to simply be herself, without fear of judgment or rejection. Marcus wasn't looking at her as an alien, as something foreign or strange. He was seeing her for who she truly was. A person, with feelings, with dreams, with fears. "But what if you find out the truth?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "What if you find out that I'm not just an outsider? I'm an exile, someone who was cast out by my own kind." Marcus paused, his expression thoughtful. "Lyra, no matter where you come from or what your past is, that doesn't change who you are right now. You've been nothing but kind and honest with me. And that's what matters. Whatever your past holds, I'm not going to turn away from you. I don't care what species you are or where you're from. You're Lyra, and that's who I care about." Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She hadn't expected such acceptance, such understanding. Marcus's words meant more to her than she could express. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had found someone who didn't just tolerate her differences, he embraced them. "Thank you," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. For who I am, not what I am." Marcus reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I'm just glad we found each other." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lyra realized something she had never allowed herself to believe. She was no longer alone. In Marcus, she had found something rare and beautiful. A true connection, one that went beyond race, beyond appearance, beyond any barrier she had built to protect herself. For the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Lyra's life had always been a series of lonely moments, isolated from the rest of the universe. Her world had been cold, defined by rules and expectations that she could never meet. But ever since meeting Marcus, she had begun to feel something different, a sense of belonging she had longed for, but never believed possible. Despite the comfort Marcus had given her, there was still a weight on Lyra's chest. She knew her relationship with him could never be easy. His human life was simple, grounded in a world that had its own set of challenges, but none of those challenges came from the deep divides between species. Lyra's past, the rejection by her own kind, lingered over her like a storm cloud. The truth about her exile was something she kept hidden, something she feared would tear apart the fragile bond she had formed with Marcus. One day, the unspoken tension between them came to a head. They were sitting in a quiet cafe at the edge of the village. Lyra was lost in thought, swirling the drink in front of her as Marcus glanced at her with concern. It was the first time in days that Lyra had seemed distant, her mind elsewhere. He could feel the unease in the air, even though she tried to hide it. "Lyra," Marcus began gently, his voice filled with quiet curiosity. "What's going on? You've been so quiet lately. Is something wrong?" Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and guilt. She had been avoiding this moment for a long time. She had promised herself she would never burden him with the truth, but she knew she couldn't keep running from it. The time had come to tell him everything. "I need to tell you something," she said softly, her voice shaky. "Something about my past, about where I come from. It's not easy for me to share, but you deserve to know the truth." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious but warm, showing her that he was there to listen, no matter what. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," he said, his tone reassuring. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." Lyra took a deep breath, gathering the strength to speak. "I come from a race of beings that value strength and perfection. But I've never fit in. My appearance, my abilities, they made me an outcast. The people of my planet didn't accept me. They saw me as a flaw, as something that didn't belong. I was cast out, exiled because I was different." Her voice faltered as she spoke, the pain of her past surfacing. She could still feel the sting of those words, the coldness with which she had been rejected. But speaking them aloud made the burden seem lighter, as if, for the first time, she was able to share her pain without fear of judgment. "I ran, Marcus," she continued. "I traveled across the stars, searching for somewhere I could belong, somewhere I could find peace. And then I found this place. And you." She met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of disbelief or fear. But instead, Marcus's eyes were soft, filled with understanding. "You've been running from your past for so long, haven't you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "You don't have to hide from it anymore. You don't have to carry that weight by yourself." Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the universe on her shoulders. Marcus wasn't frightened of her past, of what she was. He wasn't looking for reasons to push her away. He was accepting her for who she was in this moment, without judgment. "I didn't want to burden you," she whispered, the words full of vulnerability. "I didn't want you to see me as something less than what you deserve. I'm not like other humans. I'm not even like other aliens. I don't belong anywhere." Marcus reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, and it steadied her in a way she hadn't expected. "You belong here with me," he said softly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected such unconditional acceptance, especially after everything she had been through. It was a kind of love she hadn't known was possible, the kind that didn't look at the past or judge someone for where they came from. It was pure, free from the barriers that had once kept her isolated. But as much as she felt at peace in that moment, doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Lyra knew that the world they lived in wasn't simple. The political tension between species was high, and not everyone would accept their bond. She had already felt the sting of rejection from her own kind. What would the rest of the universe say when they discovered a human and an alien had formed a relationship? What consequences would they face? "Marcus, there's something you don't know," Lyra said, her voice growing serious. "My kind, our kind, has a strict way of life. When you break those rules, there are consequences. My connection to you, it's not just something that will be accepted. There will be people who will want to tear us apart, people who will see us as a threat." Marcus's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch or back away. Instead, he held her gaze firmly, as if trying to understand everything she was saying. "I don't care about any of that," he said quietly. "I care about you, and that's all that matters." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had expected him to be scared, to be worried about the dangers of their bond. But Marcus wasn't like everyone else. He didn't care about the rules that society had set. He cared about their connection, about what they shared. And in that moment, Lyra knew that she had found something she never thought possible. A real connection, one that went beyond race, beyond rules, and beyond the boundaries of the stars. She squeezed his hand, a small but meaningful gesture, Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what I would do without you. You don't have to worry about that, he replied, his voice filled with quiet confidence. We'll face whatever comes together. And for the first time, Lyra believed him. The days after their heart-to-heart conversation were filled with a sense of peace that Lyra had never known. Marcus's unwavering support made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in years. She began to relax, to let her guard down, and slowly the weight of her past seemed less heavy. There was a warmth in their bond that comforted her, making her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she could have a future here, with him. However, despite the tranquility of their private moments, the world around them was not as kind. Lyra knew that the consequences of her connection with Marcus were not something that could be ignored. Her species, though scattered across the galaxy, still held on to old traditions and beliefs that could not accept a union between her kind and humans. Lyra had been warned in the past. She had been told that if she ever became too attached to a human, there would be consequences. Her people viewed humans as nothing more than a primitive species, unworthy of any alliance. For them, Lyra's relationship with Marcus was not just unacceptable, it was a betrayal. Lyra had hoped that the peace she had found on Earth would last, but deep down, she knew that the day would come when her past would catch up to her. That day arrived sooner than she had expected. One afternoon, as she and Marcus walked through the village, they were interrupted by a sharp voice calling from behind them. Lyra. She turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the path, a tall, imposing figure that seemed out of place in the peaceful surroundings of the village. The man wore the dark robes of her people, and his eyes burned with a cold intensity. It was a representative of her race, someone she hadn't seen in years, but had feared her entire life. Darren, Lyra said quietly, her heart sinking. What are you doing here? Darren stepped closer, his gaze shifting to Marcus. Then back to Lyra. I've come to bring you home, Lyra. You've been exiled long enough. The council has made their decision. It's time for you to return to your people. Lyra's blood ran cold. I'm not going back, she said firmly, standing tall, even though her insides were shaking. I found my place here. I don't belong with them anymore. Darren's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. You may have found a human to hide behind, but that does not change who you are. The council will not allow your actions to go unpunished. You've broken the laws of our people, and for that, you will face the consequences. Marcus, who had been standing quietly by Lyra's side, stepped forward, his expression fierce. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation. She's done nothing wrong by choosing who she wants to be with. Darren turned to Marcus, his gaze cold. You are nothing but a distraction, human. Lyra does not belong here with you. Her place is with her own kind. And if you try to stop this, you will regret it. Lyra's heart raced, and she placed a hand on Marcus's arm to stop him from taking another step forward. Don't, Marcus. Please. Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. Lyra, you don't have to go back with him. You don't owe them anything. But Lyra knew that was not how her world worked. She knew that if she didn't return, there would be consequences not just for her, but for Marcus as well. Her people had a long history of retribution. If they wanted to make an example of her, they wouldn't hesitate to harm him. And that was something she couldn't allow to happen. I'm sorry, Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. I have to go. I don't want you to be hurt because of me. Marcus's face fell, and he stepped back, his eyes searching hers. But I can't lose you, Lyra. I'll come back. Lyra promised, though she wasn't sure if she could keep that promise. I will. But I need to do this. I need to face them. Darren looked pleased by her words, and he turned on his heel, signaling for Lyra to follow. Time is wasting, he said coldly. Let's go. Lyra took one last look at Marcus before turning to follow Darren. Her heart was heavy, torn between the man she loved and the people she had once called her own. She didn't want to leave Marcus behind, but she knew that this was something she had to do. As they walked away, Lyra's mind was filled with uncertainty. She didn't know what awaited her back home, or if she would ever see Marcus again. The one thing she was sure of was that she had made a choice. She had chosen to love, to be loved. And no matter what happened next, she would never regret that. Lyra sat in the small, dimly lit room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her thoughts raced as she stared out the window, watching the stars twinkle against the vast, empty sky. She had been brought back to her home planet, but it felt more like a prison than a place of refuge. The walls that surrounded her were cold and unwelcoming, the very same walls that had once rejected her. Nothing had changed, except that now, the weight of the truth hung over her like a dark cloud. She had hoped for a chance to prove herself, to show that she was more than just a product of her alien race. But instead, she found herself caught between two worlds, one that had cast her aside, and one that she could never fully belong to. The Council had made it clear that her relationship with Marcus was unacceptable, a threat to the very foundation of their society. She was expected to abandon it, to return to her people, and forget the human who had shown her kindness. Lyra clenched her fists, the frustration bubbling up inside her. She didn't want to go back to the cold, emotionless world she had left behind. She didn't want to be a part of a society that valued perfection over individuality. But what choice did she have? If she stayed, she risked bringing danger to Marcus, and that was something she couldn't allow. He was her only connection to something real, something pure. As she sat in the silence, a soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. She stood quickly, wiping away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a familiar face standing there, one she had never expected to see again. It was Darren, the same man who had brought her back to this place. "You've been alone long enough," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "The Council is waiting to speak with you. It's time to face the consequences." Lyra didn't respond. She didn't want to face anyone, especially not the Council. They had already made up their minds about her, and nothing she said would change their opinions. Still, she nodded and followed Darren down the narrow hall, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The council chambers were just as cold and imposing as Lyra remembered. The large room was filled with high-ranking members of her people, all of them seated in a circle, their eyes fixed on her as she entered. The air was thick with judgment, and Lyra felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. She had never felt more out of place in her life. "Lyra," one of the council members said, his voice stern, "you have broken the laws of our people. You have betrayed us by forming a bond with a human. You are no longer welcome here." Lyra's heart dropped. She had expected this, but it still hurt. "I didn't betray anyone," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I found something real, something I've never had before. I found someone who accepts me for who I am, not who I'm supposed to be." Another council member stood, her expression one of disdain. "You speak of acceptance, but you have chosen a human, a species far beneath us. You have chosen to lower yourself to their level. You are not welcome here, Lyra. You must leave." Lyra's chest tightened, but she refused to let them see her falter. She had been through worse than this, and she would not let their harsh words break her now. "I won't go back," she said firmly. "I found a place where I belong. I don't care what you think. I will not leave him." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. She could feel their disapproval, their anger, but she stood her ground. She had made her choice, and nothing could change that. "Very well," the leader of the council said, his voice cold. "If you refuse to follow our laws, then you are no longer one of us. You will be exiled. You will have no place here, and we will make sure that no one else will accept you either." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. "I don't need your approval," she said quietly. "I found someone who sees me for who I am. That's all I need." The council members exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such defiance from her. But Lyra didn't care. She had been living in fear for too long. It was time to live for herself, to choose her own path, even if it meant leaving behind everything she had known. As the council dismissed her, Lyra walked out of the chamber, her steps firm and resolute. She had been cast out, but she didn't feel defeated. If anything, she felt freer than she ever had before. She no longer had to hide who she was, no longer had to pretend to fit into a world that didn't accept her. She had made her decision, and nothing would stop her now. The walk back to her quarters felt different this time. The coldness of the walls no longer felt suffocating. She wasn't running from anything anymore. She was walking toward something, toward Marcus, toward the life she had chosen. Lyra didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid to face it. The council might have exiled her, but they couldn't take away the one thing that mattered, the love and acceptance she had found in Marcus. And with that thought, Lyra made her way to the shuttle port. She wasn't going to waste any more time. She was going home. Lyra's heart raced as she stood at the edge of the shuttle port, looking at the vast expanse of space before her. Her mind was filled with thoughts of the life she had left behind. The council, her people, the cold rejection. It had all led to this moment. She had made the decision to leave it all behind, to choose the life she wanted for herself. The journey ahead was uncertain, but there was one thing she knew for sure. She had to go to Marcus. She couldn't live without him. Her shuttle was ready, its engines humming softly in the background as she stood in the cold silence. The vast, empty stretch of space seemed so small to her now. Her fears, her doubts, they felt distant. The only thing that mattered was the thought of being with Marcus again. Lyra took a deep breath, her pulse quickening with each passing second. She was doing this, not for her people, not for anyone but herself. For the first time in her life, she was taking control. She was choosing the path that felt right, no matter the consequences. As the shuttle doors closed behind her, she felt the familiar hum of the ship's engines lift her from the surface. She was on her way to Earth. She was on her way back to Marcus. The flight seemed long, even though it was only a few hours. Lyra stared out the window, watching the stars rush by in a blur of light. Her thoughts turned to Marcus. She remembered their first meeting, how kind and open he had been. She had never expected that a simple human would become so important to her. But now, as she thought about him, she couldn't imagine living in a world without him by her side. She thought back to all the quiet moments they had shared, the walks in the village, the conversations under the stars. She had felt safe with him, protected, like nothing could hurt her. He had made her feel seen for the first time in her life, and that was something she could never take for granted. But now, as she neared her destination, a feeling of nervousness began to stir inside her. What if Marcus didn't feel the same way? What if he had moved on, realizing that their bond was too complicated, too risky? She had never given him the chance to truly choose her, to decide if he wanted to face the challenges of being with an alien. She had always feared that the truth would drive him away. As the shuttle descended toward Earth, Lyra pushed the thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to worry about what might happen. She had made the decision to be with Marcus, and she would fight for that choice, no matter what. The shuttle landed gently, and Lyra stepped off onto familiar ground. She took a moment to breathe in the air, letting the cool breeze wash over her. It felt like home, like the place she was meant to be. The village was quiet, just as it had been when she first arrived. She could see the familiar houses in the distance, the soft glow of lanterns lighting the streets. She walked down the path toward Marcus's home, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't wait any longer. As she reached his door, she hesitated for a moment. Her hand trembled as she knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet night. A few moments passed, and then the door opened. Marcus stood there, his expression one of surprise, but when his eyes landed on her, they softened. "Lyra," he said, his voice filled with relief and joy. "You're back." She nodded, unable to speak at first. Her heart was so full that words seemed impossible to find. She had imagined this moment so many times in her mind, but now that it was here, It felt even more real than she could have imagined. She stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face for the answers she so desperately needed. "I came back for you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't stay away any longer. I chose you, Marcus. I chose this life, with you. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to face it with you, by your side." Marcus's eyes softened and a smile spread across his face. He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I never wanted you to leave," he said, his voice gentle. "I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between me and your past. But I'm glad you came back." Lyra's heart soared as she looked into his eyes. In that moment, she knew that everything would be okay. They had chosen each other. Despite all the challenges, despite the fears, they had found something rare, something that went beyond species, beyond the rules of their worlds. "Marcus," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "will you be mine?" Marcus stepped closer, his forehead gently touching hers. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "I've always been yours, Lyra." The words were simple, but they held so much meaning. Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that they were finally together, truly together. There would be obstacles ahead, no doubt. Their bond was still something that others might not understand, and there would always be challenges to face. But in that moment, Lyra knew that they could face anything. Together. She smiled, her heart light, as she wrapped her arms around Marcus. She had finally found the one thing she had been searching for her entire life. Someone who loved her for who she was, someone who accepted her despite everything. And for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to feel truly at home.